Hello, I'm John Kay of Steppenwolf. Welcome to my podcast From Rockstar to Wildlife Advocate. The last episode ended in September 1968 with Steppenwolf's first trip to Hawaii and our performances at the Honolulu Civic Auditorium, which were received by enthusiastic audiences and made our week of fun in the sun all the more memorable. We returned to the mainland, well-rested and in good spirits, because Magic Carpet Ride, which had just been released, was rapidly climbing the charts, and we were eager to resume touring and playing increasingly larger venues. But after a play date in late September, which may have been in Salt Lake City, Rushton, our bass player, was nowhere to be found. Booked to play one of Dick Clark's TV shows the following day in Los Angeles, we were about to leave for the airport when Rushton called to say that his uncle was gravely ill somewhere back east and that he had to go see him. This story was doubtful at best, nor did Rushton sound convincing, but we had no choice but to leave without him. Michael, our guitarist, called a bass player he knew in L.A., who then stood in for Rushton at the TV studio the following day. We only played one song, most likely Magic Carpet Ride, and we were also just miming, so it was relatively easy to pull this off. After breathing a sigh of relief, Jerry, Goldie, and I put our heads together to discuss finding a more reliable bass player. In short order, we agreed that we should offer the position to our ex-Sparrow bandmate, Nick St. Nicholas. Nick had been instrumental in getting the Sparrows from Toronto to New York, and then to L.A. and San Francisco, etc. In light of all that, we felt he deserved first shot at joining our by now rather successful, well-established band. Nick was glad to join our ranks, and shortly thereafter found himself with the rest of us at American Recorders to finish our At Your Birthday Party LP in October. That same month, our Steppenwolf the Second album was released, and soon proved to be another major success for us. Nevertheless, it became clear to me that our contractual obligation of delivering 2 albums a year was totally unrealistic, for to accomplish this, we had to write and rehearse new songs and then record them between playing tour dates and TV shows. Squeezing in a few days of home life in between all this activity was a rare bonus. Well, we were young and green and felt obligated to honor what we had signed. With hindsight, it would have been better had we taken more time to write better material for the Birthday Party LP. But feeling pressure, we did our best to deliver the album on time. The first song cut was a tune I had written for Candy, a film with Marlon Brando, Richard Burton, and Ringo Starr. The film's soundtrack already included Magic Carpet Ride, but the director wanted to add a song written about Candy, the central character. So after seeing a rough cut of the film, I wrote Rock Me, which was released in February '69 as a single and went top 10. Jerry, our drummer, helped with the arrangement of Rock Me and also gave me an idea based on which I wrote Jupiter's Child. Nick, in turn, gave me the line, "It's never too late to start all over again." Using it as the central theme, I then wrote the rest of the lyrics. These 3 tunes, as well as Gabrielle's Happy Birthday, are my favorites on this album. Sometime during these recording sessions, Rushton called and told me the real reason for his no-show. He and his girlfriend belonged to a group that believed that the solar eclipse on September 26 would trigger an enormous earthquake, causing California to slide into the ocean. Since that did not occur, he was now back in Los Angeles, and I had to tell him he was no longer in the band. I took no pleasure in doing so, but felt we could no longer depend on him and consequently had to replace him. During October, in addition to the recording sessions, I was also busy moving Jutta, little Sean, and myself into our new home. We had a business manager at this point, and with royalties coming in, Jutta and I felt we could now afford to rent more spacious digs than our tiny apartment above the garage. That's when he said, "No, don't rent. You should buy a house." Jutta and I were flabbergasted. "What do you mean, buy? We don't have that kind of money." He explained, "You get a mortgage to buy a house and then establish good credit. That's how it's done." Jutta and I grew up after World War II in Germany, and all this was totally new to us. We were taught that you save your money until you have enough to buy a good winter coat or whatever. But to buy a house was out of the question. Nevertheless, based on his advice, we excitedly went house hunting and found a very nice place in the Hollywood Hills, which became our new home. After moving our few possessions into the empty house, Jutta began furnishing the place all by herself because I was only briefly at home between playdates. With Magic Carpet Ride and our second album high on the charts, we were now headlining at major venues and treated like rock stars. While riding in 2 black limousines in San Antonio to play with Johnny Winter at the Hemisphere, we passed 2 uniformed airmen who, upon seeing the limo, stopped, took off their caps, and placed them over their hearts. We chuckled when they realized the limos were not part of a funeral, but full of long-haired rockers. We had a good time in San Antonio. Our hotel was by the river. We went to see the Alamo, and the Hemisphere gig was a blast. We had played 2 days earlier with Stevie Wonder in Dallas, but I can't find much about that gig in my memory banks for some reason. However, I clearly remember our October 18 playdate with 10 Years After in Chicago because we paid a visit to the Playboy mansion while in town. When we appeared on the Playboy After Dark TV show in August, Hugh Hefner invited us to stop by when we're in Chicago. Arriving at his impressive abode in early afternoon, we were told that Mr. Hefner would emerge from his private quarters around 2 p.m. Meanwhile, while having some refreshments, we noticed a technician behind a glass wall who was busy editing 2-inch professional videotape. We were told he was removing commercials from recorded TV shows that Mr. Hefner would view later, without commercials, as befits a man of his stature who has no time to waste on such tripe. This was years before consumer videocassette recorders were introduced, and we were astounded that this type of tape editing could be done. Well, Hef, as he's known by his friends, soon joined us, dressed in a very fine robe, which apparently was his usual attire, and greeted us warmly. After a few minutes, he said, "I want to show you something," and led us to the display of a large DC-9 airplane model. The jet was all black, except for the white Playboy bunny head prominently displayed on the plane's tail. He removed the top of the model and pointed into the back of the plane. "That's my rotating round bed back there," he said. "We call this jet Big Bunny. It will be delivered in a couple of months." Well, we were duly impressed and wished him lots of fun in the friendly skies once Big Bunny was airborne. We then said our goodbyes and flew back home. In first class, not quite as luxurious as Big Bunny, but good enough for us mere mortals. Back in L.A., we soon met with photographer Henry Dilts to shoot the cover of our At Your Birthday Party album. The setting of the photo session was the burnt-out house of Bob Haidt, the lead singer of the blues band Canned Heat. Bob, who was known as the Bear, had several stacks of vinyl singles, which the fire had melted into odd-shaped vinyl columns. A badly burned guitar amplifier is also in the final shot, as is a table with a large birthday cake that the five of us surround. Someone had brought a bottle of booze, and while Henry was busy setting up his gear, I kept nipping at the bottle and became a little tipsy. Joni Mitchell, who lived in the house next door and who knew Henry quite well, stuck her head out the window and asked, "What are you guys doing over there?" Henry explained what we were up to and briefly chatted with Joni. Well, by the time he took the final shot, I was sitting at that table because standing would have been, well, challenging in my condition. One person that is standing in the photo is our producer, Gabrielle Meckler, who was standing in for our young guitarist, Michael Monarch, who was missing in action that day for reasons I can't recall. In any event, in early November, we were on the road again and back at the Fillmore East in New York, this time with Buddy Rich and his orchestra. Bill Graham co-billed unusual combinations of performers at times, and this was definitely one such occasion. Days later, we played the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh and then the Spectrum in Philadelphia with the Grateful Dead, Sly and the Family Stone. These were memorable gigs, to be sure, but our performance at the Anaheim Convention Center in California on December 13 was a particularly special event for me because that's when my mother and stepdad got to see and hear us for the first time. I sent a limousine to bring them to Anaheim and then seated them in the VIP section. They had a good time and enjoyed our show, but most importantly for me, my mother was able to see that her boy finally amounted to something. For the enthusiasm of the thousands of Steppenwolf fans definitely confirmed that. We closed out the year with dates at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, the Miami Pop Festival with Marvin Gaye, the Grateful Dead, the Butterfield Blues Band, Joni Mitchell, and others, and finally with a New Year's Eve show at the Phoenix Coliseum. 1968 had definitely launched Steppenwolf into the major leagues of rock and roll. On January the 5th, we began the new year with an appearance on my favorite TV show at the time, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on CBS. We lip-synced, as was typical back then, Magic Carpet Ride, but also Rock Me, which was released as a single the following month. In late January, we performed at Hugh Hefner's Playboy After Dark again, playing Chicken Wolf and Don't Cry from our birthday party album. We asked Hef about Big Bunny. He just smiled and said, "Soon, very soon." Big Bunny was in fact delivered a few weeks later and greeted with much fanfare by a bevy of Playboy bunnies holding a "Welcome Hef" and Big Bunny sign. Those of you watching the YouTube edition of this podcast can clearly see what a big media event Big Bunny's arrival was. The following weeks, we played Oklahoma City, Seattle, Detroit, Princeton University, Chicago, Columbus, Ohio, and then in late March, the Fillmore East again, this time with Brian Auger and the Trinity and blues artist John Hammond Jr., who influenced me in the early 60s. We played 4 high-energy shows that weekend, with our New York fans responding enthusiastically and making us feel truly appreciated. Following the Fillmore, we played Corpus Christi and Memphis, and then we were off to Europe. First stop was London to do a press reception and a show at the Wembley Arena, and then on to Germany to mime Born to Be Wild on the popular Beat Club TV show in Bremen. The show's director and crew were skilled professionals, and our mimed performance looked pretty good. Before returning to London, we did a photo session for the German pop magazine Bravo, which I used to read as a 12-year-old while still living in Germany. We scrambled up onto a fire engine for the final shot, But we looked tired and disinterested because sleep had been in short supply in the preceding days. Back in London, after playing a BBC TV show, we played the Marquee, a well-known showcase club. We shared the bill with King Crimson, a band that later influenced groups like Yes and Genesis. Next came a gig at Mother's in Birmingham, at the time declared the world's best rock venue, although I don't recall anything particularly special about the place. And lastly, the North London College. After playing in Denmark, Sweden, and Holland, we had a couple of days off in London and hung out at the Speakeasy, a late-night club frequented by musicians and record industry types, and also wound up buying classic British cars. As I recall, Jerry Edmonton bought a 1950-something Bentley, Goldie McJohn an early 50s Rolls-Royce, and I a 1936 Lagonda, a large convertible that, with its right side steering wheel, was totally impractical and gave Jutta nothing but headaches when she drove the behemoth in the Hollywood Hills. Well, we had some mad money by then, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. After returning to L.A., I enjoyed a few days off at home with Jutta and Sean. We relaxed by our newly built black-bottom swimming pool. Little Sean and I splashed around in the pool, played with hand puppets, made castles in her sandbox. In short, we had a little quality time together. But the days of family life zipped by all too quickly, for soon it was back to business. On June 20, we played the Oakland Coliseum Arena, and the next day at the Newport 69 Pop Festival. This was a 3-day event in LA's San Fernando Valley with dozens of major acts, including Jimi Hendrix, Joe Cocker, Jethro Tull, Creedence Clearwater, The Rascals, Buffy Sainte-Marie, Marvin Gaye, and many more. 200,000 music fans attended the festival, and because we went on before sunset, we saw an endless sea of faces stretching out before us. Our show went over quite well. In fact, a couple of girls climbed the at least 15-foot-high stage to get a hold of us. Once they got onto the stage, they were quickly taken away by security. But their antics made us smile nevertheless. The next day, Sunday, June 22nd, we were standing on the rain-soaked stage at Varsity Stadium in Toronto. This was the last day of the 1969 Toronto Pop Festival, and our show that night was not our finest hour. The stadium was practically empty because it had been raining much of the day. I was standing in a puddle of water on stage while trying to sing without getting electrocuted. This was before wireless electric guitars were the norm, so every time I played my guitar and got within a couple of inches of the vocal mic, a small bolt of electricity arced from the microphone and zapped my lips and made it extremely difficult for me to sing. Well, that's show business. One day you play for tens of thousands in Southern California, the next day for a few hundred while getting your lips fried in the rain. Despite that unpleasant, electrifying experience, our touring was going quite well. However, the sales of our At Your Birthday Party LP were not. So in July, Dunhill Records, seemingly desperate for another Steppenwolf record, released something called Early Steppenwolf, which was nothing more than a 1967 live performance by the Sparrow at the Matrix Club in San Francisco, recorded without our knowledge or consent by the club's manager. Dunhill plugged the record as a, quote, collector's album, but we weren't happy about this, although the release bought us time for working on what became the Monster LP, our next legitimate release. Earlier that year, we had been contacted by Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper, inviting us to a private screening of their film Easy Rider, because they wanted to use The Pusher and Born to Be Wild in the film's soundtrack. At the screening, other artists whose recordings had also been requested, Jimi Hendrix, the band, the Byrds, Bob Dylan, etc., were represented as well. We enjoyed watching the film until we saw the ending, which absolutely stunned us. Despite the fact that Peter and Dennis had run out of funds and were unable to pay major licensing fees, we were eager to have our music included in the film and persuaded our label, Dunhill Records, to settle for minimal fees. A soundtrack of strictly rock and contemporary music by major recording artists had never been done. Yes, a song or two, such as Magic Carpet Ride and Rock Me in the film Candy, was not unusual, but the rest of the soundtrack was the typical orchestral music featured in most films at the time. Years later, Dennis Hopper told me he had simply chosen songs from some of his favorite albums, and after including the songs in the soundtrack, invited the various recording artists to a private screening and then hoped for the best. Once most of the artists gave their blessing, the next question was, how do you make a soundtrack album when the artists in question are recording for different record labels? Well, Jay Lasker at Dunhill Records managed to convince his counterparts at various labels to permit their artists to appear on the Easy Rider soundtrack LP to be released by Dunhill. That proved to be a particularly advantageous development for us, for once the film was released in July '69, Easy Rider became a major international success and introduced our music to people in places we had yet to visit, and paved the way for us to later tour in those countries. Insisting on being part of Easy Rider turned out to be one of the better moves we made. By August '69, with several successful records under our belt, we were deemed worthy of appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show. This was a big deal back then, for on Sunday nights, when The Sullivan Show aired on CBS, over 60 million people watched all across the U.S. This show had introduced the Beatles and Rolling Stones to America, and now it was our turn to try and make a splash.
Now for all of you teenagers, the long-haired Steppenwolf rock and roller. So let's have a fine welcome.
During our appearance on August 17, we played a medley of Born to Be Wild, Magic Carpet Ride, and It's Never Too Late. Tom Gundelfinger O'Neill, our friend and photographer, was with us and took some excellent shots of our performance, but also of Ed Sullivan's reactions to what occurred after we finished our performance. Ed would often chat with an artist when the artist received a strong response. Well, our audience was full of teenage girls who erupted with cheers and shrieks to show their appreciation for our performance. So Ed motioned us over and asked me, who are some of your favorite artists? I replied, Jimi Hendrix. Ed then turned to Nick, and Nick said, my favorite bands are the Fugs. Ed, taken aback, stuttered, the Frogs? And Nick, with emphasis, repeated, no, man, the Fugs. At the end of our chat, Tom's photo shows our backs as we're leaving the stage, and Ed rolling his eyes as if to say, thank God this is over. So we did make a splash, all right, one that provoked much laughter in the dressing room afterwards. 6 days later, we played Move Over and Power Play from our yet-to-be-completed Monster album on American Bandstand. But then Michael Monarch, our very young guitarist, decided to leave Steppenwolf and pursue solo projects. That was an unwelcome surprise, but Nick St. Nicholas immediately recommended lead guitarist Larry Byram as Michael's replacement. Nick had played with Larry in the band Time and spoke highly of Larry's playing. Well, Nick was right. Larry proved to be an excellent addition to the band, for besides being a fine creative player, he was also a very good singer. By early September, When we played in Dallas, he had our set list down cold. 8 days later, we headlined a sold-out show at the Los Angeles Forum, during which we premiered songs from the upcoming Monster album, and Larry's playing was outstanding. Now, I can't recall if the following occurred before or after September 20, when we played in Honolulu and zapped around on dune buggies while exploring the island of Oahu. But I do know it was sometime in September when Jutta and I attended a party hosted by Mama Cass Elliot and Kirk Douglas for Donovan, whose Barar Bijarab album had just been released. The party was held at the Factory, a private club near the Troubadour in West Hollywood. We were having a couple of drinks when Jimi Hendrix asked us to join him at his table. I had not spoken with him since we met at the Scene in New York the year before. After some chatting, we got into a conversation about how music might be created in the distant future, perhaps with electrodes that would convert the brain's music ideas into audible sounds and so on. At some point, Jimmy said, "Let's go to my place, where it's quiet and we can talk some more, okay?" He had rented a house in Beverly Glen, where we joined him a short time later and continued to talk about music. Jutta, who in addition to the drinks at the club had taken THC pills, decided to jump into Jimmy's pool. While she was busy swimming, Jimmy and I sat by a table with record albums, one of which was Steppenwolf II. He picked up the LP cover and asked, "You wrote Don't Step on the Grass, Sam, on this, right? Is that you playing the guitar riff?" I told him I was, and he said, "That's a cool riff." I mentioned that it's just a simple first position E chord riff, but he said he liked it nevertheless. What surprised me was that despite his amazing guitar skills, he was still listening to what other players were doing. It was now quite late and completely quiet, so it was easy to talk, one-on-one, without distractions or interruptions, until Jutta emerged from the pool, shivering and still a little high, and more than a little tipsy. So we decided to make our way home. With hindsight, it was crazy for Jutta to have driven in her condition, but thankfully we made it home safely. That night, I had gotten to know Jimmy a little. Not the rock star, Jimmy the person, who was soft-spoken, unpretentious, and congenial. I liked Jimmy very much, but only saw him one more time when Steppenwolf was in New York to play Carnegie Hall in December '69. I had befriended Noel Redding, and we were having a drink at Max's Kansas City when Noel said, "I gotta go see Jimmy about something." Noel was no longer playing bass with Jimmy, but still in touch with him, because we went to see him at a recording studio that I believe was the Record Plant. Except for a recording engineer, Jimmy was there by himself and playing when we walked in. I got the impression he was laying down some ideas, for he stopped playing quickly and came into the control room. He said hello, but after he and Noel finished talking, he wanted to get back to work, and Noel and I departed. In September 1970, Jimmy departed as well, and I, for one, did not take that well, for I admired him greatly, and I still do. Now I will go back a few months to November 1969, when Monster, our social, political concept album, was released. This record was truly a joint effort. Goldie and Nick, and particularly Larry and Jerry, had written almost all the music of the instrumental tracks, while I wrote the lyrics and vocal melodies of the songs. The album's cover is a band photo taken by Tom Gundelfinger in the sand dunes north of Malibu that is combined with a striking graphic created by well-known artist Rick Griffin. That graphic's powerful monster image illustrates the album's lyrics, which in turn reflect our feelings about the turmoil and convulsions our country was going through at the time. When the record came out in November, more and more increasingly large anti-Vietnam War demonstrations were rippling across the U.S., particularly on college campuses, often resulting in violent confrontations with police and the National Guard. Close to 50,000 U.S. soldiers had died in Vietnam at this point, while thousands more were drafted every month and sent overseas. On November 15, more than 500,000 demonstrated in Washington, D.C., with additional demonstrations taking place in other U.S. cities. Not surprisingly, the Monster album was highly successful on college campuses, but was also taken to heart by others who felt disillusioned by the state of affairs in the homeland. I can't tell you how many times we were told that album gave voice to my concerns at the time. It was gratifying to know that the feelings expressed in our lyrics made a connection with many. From letters that began to trickle in, we learned that the Monster album had moved some to become journalists, inspired teachers to play the record and discuss the lyrics with their students, and motivated others to become history teachers. In 2008, during the financial crisis and recession that cost many their jobs, savings, and homes, we received more and more requests to play Monster. We had not played it for years, but from then on it was part of every one of our performances. Rare was the night that Monster did not receive a standing ovation. On the next episode, we visit backstage at the Grand Ole Opry while playing in Nashville. We spend a Sunday afternoon with Johnny Cash and June Carter and their family at their beautiful lakeside home. We have a fantastic show at London's Royal Albert Hall. We record our Steppenwolf Live LP and much more. So until then, thanks for listening. Stay well and stay wild.
Thank you for joining us on Rockstar to Wildlife Advocate from wherever you get your podcasts and from our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/RSTWA. Be sure to follow us and don't forget to subscribe for free so you won't miss any upcoming episodes. Rockstar to Wildlife Advocate is brought to you in part by the Maukay Foundation. Please visit maukay.org to learn about our efforts to protect wildlife. That's MAUEKAY.org. We hope to see you again on the next episode of Rockstar to Wildlife Advocate.